What is up, all my fellow Stardew players? Today we have a great build for you today, and we're going to be doing a remodel of one of my favorite characters within Stardew Valley. I actually have been spending a great deal of time building this, but I wanted to make it in a way that anybody could redo this build. So I wanted to start from a template and make it that way. Anybody who wants to take this, remake this, or model this the way they want to, you have a basis to go off of. I think the big difficulty within Stardew Valley is that people usually have amazing farm builds, but they don't really build into Stardew Valley's main town, Pelican Town. So I really wanted to make a build that accompanies that really gets into the area of the village, but actually goes into the interpersonal stories and the things that we build with those characters. So I took Elliott's cabin, one of the most remote and kind of run down looking locations, but actually beautiful on the inside, and I made it into something great. And so if you like the build, make it in your own villages and your own farms, and then remake them and remodel them. Show me those builds. I really want to see what you guys have to bring to the table, and we're going to keep on doing builds just like this. So if you like it, give it a like, give it a subscribe. Without further ado, here's the video. The idea for this build came from the place that I wanted to give a space for Elliot that we could share with, as well as support his need to write, as well as his love for books. So let's take a look at Elliot's new home. I named this build the Library of the Sunlit Sea, and it's in reference to the 14 Heart event for Elliot. And I think another quaint thing about this is that he uses this space in similar ways to the garden that he would use at home. The idea behind this is that he would go to this place, read, but it also gives space for others in the town to read. Because if you know anything about Elliot inside Stardew Valley, is that he's kind of a reclusive, not by choice, but because the people of Stardew are a little bit hesitant to new villagers. So he goes from his cabin and goes to the library to read, and may go to the bar a couple of times, but you don't really see him out and about too often until you start to explore his story and give him gifts. You understand that he's a writer and that he has struggled to write his own book for quite some time. And I think the hard thing about Pelican Town is that it doesn't leave a lot of room for this kind of customization. And I wanted to make a build that accompanied the relationships and the adventures you experience within Stardew. And Elliot's no exception to this, really. You discover a lot more about him once you reach the marriage level, but I think one of my favorite parts about Elliot is hidden within the secret note number 7. And you find out he's actually one of the older bachelors within Pelican Town. He moved to this area to kind of get a focus on his writing, but also to maybe gain some support of some of the more local people and to get a different perspective. And whenever you meet him for the first time, you give him that perspective, and he starts to write a book and starts to progress it, and you get actual book reading whenever you progress in the heart events. And I think of Elliot as that little bit of loner, and I said not by choice earlier. I think this is because one of his friends are Willie the fisherman, which he lives next to, and of course Leah, who's the other artist in town. And I think most of the villagers kind of project a weariness to difference when it comes to them. So you have people like Marnie and Mayor Lewis, who have a secret relationship, and you have Leah, who's an artist as well. So a lot of the different people, there's a bit of different expression to their artistic values. And I think over time, Elliot begins to feel like he doesn't have the support. Even though he's moved here, he even states that he's had moved here only a year before you. And so in that time, he hasn't really had a lot of progress that he would wish to have. So Elliot moved away from his home, and he doesn't have the support that he needs, but we can build that together. So the idea was to make a space that's open and inviting to other villagers. And I wanted this to be a proper space where people would be able to do book readings, and the idea behind the hearth, using the space and the fire area as a open space where maybe someone would read or speak. Now, Elliot, of course, isn't a fan of public speaking, but it gives a space to enjoy things together. And I think that kind of warps and changes the idea of how we think about Elliot. You initially see this cabin sort of bare and nothing around it, maybe some small stepping stones, but really just kind of looks like a small shed for the most part. And I really wanted to give it the aspect of being the open library, being a place that people want to hang out and go to, as well as read a book, and maybe that he would read his own books too. So one of the things that I thought that was really interesting is that Elliot not only is a interesting character, but he actually is a decent writer. I think the book reading that happens later on, whatever you decide, whether it's the romance, the mystery, the sci-fi story, I think it doesn't give proper credit to how good of a writer Elliot actually is. And I'm going to read the poem that he sends you during the 14 Heart event, right before he leaves and he returns. He actually writes you a poem, which I actually think is really sweet. And this actually inspired the name of this build. So I'm going to read it right now. In dreams, when graced with lofty view, I gaze upon the sunlit sea. What distant shores I've traveled to, but time now clouds my memory. There is but one eternal place where I shall someday pass beyond, in Valley Dear, where my love waits, our little home beside the pond. And I think this, of course, referenced the relationship that you have with the character, but I think when he looks back to before you built a relationship, whether it's the friendship or if you went as far as the marriage with the character, you can see that he has this great place, sort of his retreat, where he can focus on his writing. And he can't think about those moments because of how much he's moved on from those. He's moved to such a bigger place from that time. And I think that you sort of pull him out of a rut. And this happens across Stardew Valley. It really does. You see a lot of characters where they start out and not only do you build up the town from being sort of a rundown, a lot of villagers have left. Elliot follows that same exact thing, even though he's not necessarily involved with a lot of the other characters. Even when you're building a friendship with him and you drink at the bar with him, you see that most people are unaccustomed to him being present. You at least get that vibe that he's not normally amongst the town. He doesn't share amongst the town. Another comparison is when Sam has his concert and that's out of town, you see the people of Stardew Valley going to support him and actually going out with him to make sure that they can show their support. Whereas with Elliot's experience, his book reading, you can begin to see people sort of trickle out of the reading as time goes on. And of course, if people show the people stay along, and there's still people who I don't think they don't exactly hate him, but I think they have a bit of indifference towards the character. And I think it's a misunderstanding that many people think that Elliot is a character who is not necessarily, more of like too prideful and too snooty. I think he is very much vain, and he does have a slight obsession with himself, and I think that projects through his many sayings, but I don't think that makes him a bad person. I think he has a odd way of showing himself, and he's not used to that. And I think that comes off as a bit of awkwardness, and it can come off as being overly prideful. And so it's not to say that he is not vain, but rather that he is not used to it, because you can see as he begins to tell a little bit more about himself and is a little bit more vulnerable, you begin to understand where he's coming from. So as I finished the last parts of this build, we added in a lot of the flooring to begin, and these are the hardest parts of the build. I'm using the reference here. I create this reference because most builders, if you're doing a Stardew Valley planner, you can build within your farm, but I found it too difficult to build these outside of the farm. There's not really a reference. So what I did here is I took a image. If you need to use it, there's a pathing image that you can use from the Stardew Valley wiki. I used the worm bins, which shows you where you can place them, and it gives you a perfect template to where you can place items. I like to build first and then remove stuff later. If people are running into it and clipping it, I'll remove it. If you look closely, you can see one of the pillars that I didn't build. That's because it would clip with some of the characters, so I didn't build anything there. The good part about this is that you're not going to get any of your stepping stone paths, your brick pathways, or anything like that interrupted by your characters. It's not going to get destroyed, but of course, anything that would collide, such as chairs or bookshelves, you got to put those out of the way, because sometimes they'll walk through them, sometimes they'll destroy them. I found that they couldn't walk through the marble columns, but they could walk through the bookshelves, but they would break them. So the issue with that was sort of building around that and building around that pathing. The next challenge came, of course, with matching and making things light up the way I want it to. So you see me here building the bookshelves, and we're adding those in. Another thing I wanted to think about is how it looks at night. So I will add torches to the back of some of these pillars to give them a more brightened aspect. That way you can see it at night. You of course can't light the fire in the center there, but the torches essentially give that aspect. It's a great way to add lighting to your build without adding too much space, because the torches, the lamps, they can take up a lot of space. So I didn't want to do that. So I put them right behind the pillars, and you can walk right over a torch without being burned or anything like that. And the last thing I'm building here is sort of the plants and the tables. The seasonal plants are some of my favorites to use because they change in the spring and summer months. But the blue plants, I think, give a great bit of color, as well as the red tables, which actually my son suggested. It was between the red tables and the white tables. There's also some brown tables that I could have done, but I think he made a great choice because the red definitely gives it a little more color. And it's also one of the colors that Elliot wears in his nice little suit. I think that was a nice comparison, sort of by accident. And then we're just going to place some chairs, kind of to give a proper seating. I liked using the benches. I actually changed this build along the way by adding the benches. And you'll notice there's a couple of items in my inventory that I may run out of, or I may swap for others. And that's just because when I rebuild this, often the idea will change. I'll find that I'll want to do something different. And then we're just going to do the night view just to give you a nice idea of what it looks like at nighttime as well. Alrighty guys, if you like this build and you want to see more builds like this, give the page a like and subscribe. I also stream on Twitch Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I'd love to see you there. If you have any recommends on the builds, I'd love to see them. Thank you.